Alex, welcome back to the podcast.
Hey Matt, thanks for having me, and happy belated birthday, by the way.
Oh, thank you, and happy post Thanksgiving. This is we're recording this on a Friday after Thanksgiving.
Mm-hmm.
So for the audience, if you're new to the show or you're not familiar with Alex, he was actually on episode 333, which was on May 2nd of 2021.
Wow, it's been
So
4 years.
I will, yeah, I know, like that, it just goes by. I'll include a link in the show notes, and everybody can check out kind of the origin story of your whole background. And today I thought we would just chat, catch up, and I would actually possibly dig a little deeper into your world, which I'm looking at the old episode, and one of the topics was doom metal. And I just want to clarify, is doom metal something that you are doing to this day? Is that the primary form of music you work in?
No, not at all. It's like I kind of go through phases with genres, and it's kind of dictated more by, the clients I'm working with. But I do write that stuff for my own personal music. I actually just recorded a few, I guess you could say, doom metal-ish songs over at Sunset Sound this past weekend. I was there on Saturday. So I had like 4 songs of my own ready, and then I had a few other artists that came in. But yeah, I do like that genre. But yeah, I go through all kinds of phases of metal, to be honest. But there's something very specific about doom that I like, which is just there's such a wide, vast variety of sonic textures with guitar tones in doom metal. There's all kinds of different like fuzzes and overdrives, distortions, and like walls of guitar sound that you can experiment with, and it's just really sonically pleasing to me.
Who would you consider your contemporaries from a production standpoint in that arena?
It's weird because I don't really pay attention as much to engineers or producers anymore. It's just more like if I hear a band that I like the sound of, I'll listen to it and put it in a playlist. But there's some guys that are really hot right now that are, I wouldn't say they do doom metal exactly, but they're in the extreme metal arena. And this kind of like ties into what we were talking about before, but about like mixing and mastering in the same session and etc. But there's a couple guys, like I was just listening to a podcast with Mark Lewis. He does a lot of really extreme metal bands. He's done Cannibal Corpse, he's done Cold Chamber, but he actually did those 2 records in the same year, and they sound vastly different. But he's a guy that's extremely talented. There's another guy called Buster Odholm. He's from Sweden, and he's very popular. He's very hot right now in the metal genre, and he does a similar kind of thing where mixing and mastering in the same session. It's like walls of sound, like extremely loud masters, but still like not unsatisfying distortion. It distorts, but in a pleasing way. Really, really hot LUFS levels, but still really smooth and polished and pleasing. Big kicks and snares that really cut through. So those guys they're doing a lot in metal right now. And there's another guy named Dave Otero. Have you heard of Dave?
I have heard of Dave, actually.
Yeah, he does the same thing, mix and master in the same session. So there's a lot of people doing that in the metal and the extreme metal genres. And we can get into like the nuance of that. But yeah, those guys they're pretty hot. So I like a lot of their productions, but it's not that I'm not paying attention to who's doing what as much anymore, but I'm more just I'm trying to let go of that, because I realize, I don't know if you've ever done this in your career, Matt, but sometimes, we go through phases where we're really excited on a specific sound, like production sound, and we try to like aim for that in our own work. And I found myself kind of just like getting lost in that, like, kind of chasing my own tail, like trying to like catch, latch onto a specific sound. But then I realized like I'm changing the raw source material too much. And I kind of just started getting back to like letting the tracks and the mix like be what it is. So I'm kind of gone through a phase with that. But yeah, those guys are doing a lot in extreme metal right now.
Yeah, it's interesting when it comes to just on the topic of looking at what other people are doing or hearing what other people are doing. I had a client recently. In fact, I'm going to talk to her today, but she sent me a message and said, "Hey, did my references make sense to you? And are you getting a lot of ideas from that?" And I said, "Absolutely. References are super important, but I don't necessarily try to chase those sounds. I instead try to be inspired by what you're sending me, and kind of listen to it once, get a vibe, and then do what I think is best for your project." Because talking about ecosystems, I think that her references were one ecosystem, and her actual production was a completely different ecosystem. But there are ideas that I cherry pick, and I know that many of us have gone through oh man, I really want to get that sound, or that snare sound, or that guitar sound, or vocal treatment, or whatever it is. And I've stopped doing that. It just doesn't work because it's not the same thing.
Yeah. And I think that's something that some musicians, like people that are maybe not as far along in their careers, like artists and musicians, and maybe they're in rock, they're in metal, but they're trying to chase a specific sound, and they're doing everything they can to sound like X band. But the reality is, like, even if you hire the same producer that did that record and you use the same gear and you write similar songs, like there's no way to replicate it. So it's like, what's the point? Yeah, like we can use albums and artists as inspiration, but I think the magic is really in just kind of surrendering to your own creativity and just letting things be what they are. And I find a lot of artists kind of struggle with that earlier in their careers. I definitely did, but there's magic in, like, after you've been writing songs and you've had experience in the studio and you've been doing it for so many years. I think the magic is in just kind of surrendering to what magic actually is captured in the studio and just let the sounds be what they are. And yeah, of course you can enhance in the mix, but not like completely replacing all the drums. It's like, like, what's the point of capturing a great drummer if you just basically erase everything and just replace it with samples?
Your current practice of, let's start with guitars, for example. I see a lot of virtual guitar sounds that people are plugging into Racked and then getting those sounds via plugin, via external hardware box. Is that something that is common in what you're doing?
Yeah, I get a lot of artists that maybe they'll track their ideas and demos through, the neural DSP stuff, which that stuff's really good. I like I use the Gojira X a lot on. I'll use that on like final mixes. That's great. But I think it's whatever sounds good. Like, I don't have a preference, whatever. If it sounds great and it's a Kemper, awesome. If it sounds great and it's a tube head, I mean, honestly, I still prefer tubed heads for metal. It's still like, people say that they can't tell the difference, but I mean, to me, it's still a night and day difference when you mic up, a Mesa cab with great speakers into an amazing tubed head, and you get the nice blending of the mic, or even just using a 57, like, and then you run that through a Neve, and then you compare that to a plugin. It's still, to me, it's a huge difference still. But there's people that argue that you can't tell the difference in the mix, and that's fine. But I'm just about whatever sounds good in the moment, whatever the artist is vibing on, and if they want to use some crappy plugin and they love how it sounds, then cool, But I still don't think the plugins and the emulations and, like the neural quad cortexes, like, I know a lot of people that use those, and to me it's like they're phenomenal pieces of technology, and it's super versatile and people are using them live. But when I plug that in directly into Pro Tools, and then I compare that to a nice tubed head that's been mic'd up, still there's no comparison.
One thing that I am continually chasing, I think, is when somebody sends me tracks to mix, there's, I don't know why lately, I feel like there's a lack of air. There's a lack of space. And I know I sound like the old guy even saying this, but like, so I have this Led Zeppelin box set and I keep cycling through that and listening to it, and just the tones are great, but what really strikes me is the space around some of those tones. And I feel like music today in many respects is like all up here, in your face, as opposed to, in a space. And I think that the character of space is really what gives a recording even more character. So,
Yeah,
and I find that when I have mic'd up amps, that space tends to exist.
absolutely. And one of the things I really, really love to do, which can give you a completely unique sound, is a lot of guys, they'll you can do the 157 on the cone or on the speaker, however you like to place it, and then you can pair it with whatever other mic if you like to use two mics, like a ribbon or a 421 or whatever. But what I really love to do is I like to use the 57, maybe another mic. A lot of the time I don't even bother, because like the 57 sounds great as is, and I don't like having multiple tracks for one guitar take and then having to like go through it later. It's a pain in the ass. I guess you can combine the signal and commit that, but I really love to do the 57 directly on the speaker, and then I like to do just a room mic, like you would do a room mic for drums, but like a room mic for the guitar, and then put it farther away, or like in the corner of the room, or like if you're in a big space, like a big studio, put it far back in the farthest corner of the room, and then like turn the mic into the corner, and then blend that in. Of course, there's going to be a delay and phasing, but just get that blended in right and adjust it if you need to. I really love that, because then it captures the tone of the guitar in the room. And if it's a great room, and if it's a more unique space, then you have a completely unique sound, and I love doing that, because it just totally changes it. You get the directness of the 57, but then you get that air and that space of a huge room. And then when you blend that into the mix, especially if you have a great drum sound with a room sound as well, it's huge. And you can't get that with the plugin, at least from my experience.
I'm quite fond of Kurt Ballou and what he does with High on Fire in particular. The sounds that he gets, that just, it sounds organic. It sounds like a band. It doesn't sound overtly processed, I
Yeah.
guess, is what I get out of it. It feels like a group of musicians filling a room with sound. And in some cases, sometimes that sound seems to like almost make that room want to burst in some
Mm.
instances, but I still get that air, especially on the drums. And I know that you were just at Sunset Sound doing some stuff. In fact, you sent me a link, and I clicked on it on my phone. I need to click on it on the computer and hear it in a better way. But can you talk a little bit about your approach there recently with drums and what you were up to there?
We were there on Saturday. I brought in two different artists I've been working with, and then for the last few years. One of them, his name is Sin Kieran. He plays in a band called Siglos, which I've done a lot of work with them. He also played in Ministry for a while, so I brought him in, and we recorded a track for one of his new songs. And my good friend Jordan is the drummer of Siglos, and he's like my session drummer that I use on pretty much everything I do. If it's for my own music, or if an artist needs drums, like he's a fantastic drummer, super reliable. So we went in, and we tracked one song for Siglos, and then I had like four tracks of my own personal music that I was working on. We recorded that. But the room, we used Sunset Sound Studio 2, which sounds phenomenal. Like that live room, the decay of it is it's like unmatched. And I've recorded in Studio 3 before as well, which is also phenomenal. But the Studio 2 room is a little deeper, so there's a longer decay. And one of my favorite things to do, if you have the option of like getting into a killer drum room, I notice a lot of engineers, they'll put their room mics like maybe cymbal height or like snare height, which is cool. But I really like to put them as low as possible, like where the kick drum is or like where the drummer's feet are, like as low as possible. Because what happens is you get less cymbal, and that's one of the things like I don't like when I get drum recordings and the rooms are like all cymbal, because it's like then you can't compress it and get that kick and snare like smack and aggression because there's so much cymbal going on. So I like to put the room mics really low, left and right. So we did that, crushed them with an 1176 on left and right, and it sounded phenomenal. So when you can get into a great room, just the more you can, if you have time to experiment with where you place your room mics, I think you'll be surprised if you try something really weird and you can get really cool sounds. We also do, I think we put a U87 in, there's a ISO room where the grand piano is at Sunset. So we put a U87 in there and then crack the door a couple inches and then crush the hell out of that. And the room sound from that is incredible too, because it's like a squashed even more naturally just from being in the ISO booth with the door. And then you crush that even more. I think on that we used a Chandler compressor, but just messing around with how you get the sound of a room, because I think a lot of people, especially when you're starting out, like I remember when I was starting out, I was like, I don't care about the room mics, like I just want to get a great kick and snare and tom sound or whatever. But it plays such a huge role in like the aggression and the attack and the character of your drum sound. So it's fun to really experiment with where you place your room mics and all that.
The technique that you just referred to of putting a mic in an adjacent room with the door kind of cracked. The first time I encountered that, I was in a band called 7 Day Diary, and we were in England recording with Gil Norton, and he did that on my drums at the time, and it was just because the primary live room was quite small. And I found that by him doing that, that made the room sound 10 times bigger than it really
Yes.
was. And it's such a clever trick, because it's just like that narrow gap there in the door that allows that sound to travel in, hit that mic, get super compressed. Just, it does wonders for, as you say, the aggression of what you're trying to achieve. And secondly, you were talking about the heights of the room mics in a drum miking situation. I've also found that by not using condenser mics, by using ribbon mics, or one of my favorites is these Electro Voice omnidirectional dynamic microphones. They look like they're little reporter microphones, and you can find them kind of cheap. That type of mic also just kind of smooths that top end out, so that you can really have that focus in the mid range and the bottom end with the kick and the snare in the room. And I wanted to ask, the decay that you mentioned in Studio 2 at Sunset Sound, the decay, is it a top end decay, or is it like a bottom end decay? What kind of decay are we talking about?
It's like a mid decay. Like it's there's just super pleasing in it. The way that obviously the delay, people get all bent out of shape about, oh well, be careful with the phasing of the room and the delay, and some people even like they'll nudge their room mic like closer to the actual kick and snare transients or whatever. But I love having that delay. It's like every kick and snare, especially if you have like really big open, if your drummer is playing big open kicks and snares, like slower beats, it just blooms like magic in there. It's like it's hard to explain, but it's like it opens up, and it's like plumes of smoke. It's like it's so fucking brilliant the way it sounds in there. But yeah, like when you said ribbons, we used the Coles. I forgot which model of Coles we used, but we used Coles ribbon mics for the rooms, and man, it's just gorgeous. And it's you can't like it. It's hard to like put that into words if you haven't experienced that. But the way like your drummer sounds with that kind of an open room and just mic'd like that is just, it's incredible. Like I can't get enough of it, honestly.
And I mean, all this, these ideas and techniques, I think they're great, but if you don't have a good drummer, it doesn't even matter.
Yeah, totally. And it actually makes things worse. Like all this gear, like you know, all these things we obsess about, like the fancy studios with the great treatment and the great gear and the expensive mics and the expensive preamps. All this stuff actually, if the drummer is bad, it actually makes them sound even worse because it's like a extremely intense microscope on your playing. So that's why you know how great a drummer is if you get him into a studio, like a world-class studio, and they sound phenomenal. Like then you know, like they can be anywhere. They could play anywhere with any kind of situation and sound incredible. But yeah, like those kind of sessions are extremely revealing.
In my experience, and which I don't have a ton of in extreme metal type music, it is a wall of sound. It
Mm-hmm.
seems to take a lot of skill to manage the real estate, the sonic real estate, to make sure that everything plays its role as it should and not, cover up everything else. Is there, an accepted treatment of guitars in terms of sounds and what everybody's expecting, or are you just trying to shape it as you go along and do what you think is right at the moment?
Yeah, I'm shaping as I go along. Um, yeah, it is a challenge. It's quite different than I would say traditional mixing techniques, and I think that's why maybe the more old school engineers like kind of get really pissed off about this kind of mixing and like how I was saying before, like you know mixing and mastering in the same session because it is very odd compared to you know the standard practices of how you would properly mix a song, and I get that, in a way like that's why it's such a treat when when I'm not working on metal, like I'm working on something a bit more chill or softer or something more like orchestral, because then you just balance, you know, you're just balancing and you know finessing with EQ, and you don't have to worry about how do I put this wall of puzzle pieces of sound together. You just get to kind of relax and push faders up, and then it sounds great. You don't have to worry about Tetrising everything together, and that's what it is with extreme metal because you know everyone loves the sound of these modern metal productions. Like they just get more and more and more loud and more aggressive and more extreme, like with the production value. And it's like the kicks are huge, the snares are huge. There's actual like sound design, like production, like a lot of these records they have on the downbeats. There's like explosions. There's like you know like movie soundtrack explosion type stuff under all like under kicks, under snares, like layers and layers of stuff like that. I've done it quite a bit myself. It's fun to add that kind of stuff to it. Gives it more of like a cinematic feel.
Mhm.
But yeah, there's just so much to keep track of, and it is quite a challenge indeed.
Do bands expect a certain level of technology to be involved in the shaping of a record, bands of who make that kind of music, or do they come at it with an organic kind of idea? And is it the producer or the engineer interjecting these other technologies?
I think it just depends on the artist you're working with, but there have been situations where bands expect, okay, like kind of what we were talking about before, they're sending you these references to certain records that they're digging, and they want it to be as loud as this and as aggressive as snare like this. So there are situations where it's a bit more challenging because they're expecting a certain bar. You're expecting you to hit a certain bar, regardless of what they've actually sent you. You know, and there's times when you might not even be able to get it there because, you know, the files they've sent you are not to that level of professionalism the way that it was recorded. So it's like, yeah, it's a challenge. And some bands are more like they just kind of trust you and let you do your thing. But there's been times when I find myself like really struggling to, okay, wow, they want this to be louder, or they're saying like, oh, certain parts aren't hitting as hard as they should, even though like the recording is really bad, and all that stuff is, you know, I've gone through thousands of notes in a session to, you know, sound replace kicks and snares and toms, because that's another nightmare is, you know, they expect huge impact on their drums, but what they've sent you is actually really weak. So the only way to get that sound is to go through and sound replace every single hit of the song, which is extremely time consuming. And then if you're using something like Trigger by Slate, which is a great plugin, but it's not perfect. So you kind of have to go through every note and make sure there aren't any phase issues. And I don't know if you've ever come across that, but there have been times where, say you use Trigger to replace kicks, and then you commit that track with Trigger on it. But if you go through and check every note, some of them are aligned, but some of them aren't perfectly aligned, and so you have to kind of go through and nudge them to be back in phase, because you'll notice like certain hits are out of phase. So like certain hits will be like nice and punchy and impactful as they should be, but some of them, since they're out of phase, they're like weak, and you're like, what happened there? So you have to go through and make sure everything that's printed from Trigger is, every note is in phase. So that's a nightmare, because with extreme metal, sometimes there's like literally thousands of notes, thousands of drum notes in each song. So it's like, that's a huge, it takes up a lot of time to make sure everything is hitting right and the impact is there.
That's tough, because it's not like just, simple open backbeats. There's, blast beats and incredibly, 30-second 64th note, drum fills.
Yeah. And the kicks and snares, it's not fun, but it's easier. But like when you have trouble, when say the drummer is struggling and he's trying to do these really insanely elaborate tom rolls and fills, but it's not quite nailing it. Like you can hear what they're going for, but they're not in time. They're not nailing it. A lot of the hits are really weak, like velocity wise. So you have to kind of go in and see, okay, what's actually going on here with these notes? Like try to figure out exactly what they're going for, what they're trying to play. And then you kind of have to go in and rewrite those notes. You could do, a lot of people do with MIDI, but I kind of just go in and sometimes, especially with fills, I'll lay samples manually just to make sure that it's right. It takes a lot more time, but it's definitely worth it once you get everything in there. But yeah, that is one of the not so fun parts of this genre. That's for sure.
Yeah, I've often found that depending on how the tracks were captured, the articulation, the detail in a drummer's playing is not well represented sometimes. And I find that when triggering or doing any of that kind of drum augmentation or replacement, sometimes I have to pre-treat. I'll have to go in and manipulate the waveform itself. So I'll have to do some clip gain, and then I'll have to use a series of other plugins even to just prep it and pre-treat it to get it to hit that trigger just so it's right.
Yeah, you're triggering me right now. Literally, no pun intended. But like it's a pain in the ass, because unfortunately some drummers, like they try to play way more advanced than they actually can, or maybe they are playing the fill correctly, but especially like the rack toms, maybe they're hitting their notes like pretty weak compared to like the noise floor of the whole track. So, oftentimes I get recordings, especially on toms, where like, you'll see throughout the waveform, like the snares, you'll see like the snare transients in the tom tracks, but when they go to play the toms, they're playing the toms with less velocity than they're hitting the snare. So the actual hit on the tom track of the tom is way lower velocity wise than like you'll see the snare on the tom track. So you have to go in, like you said, you go in, clip gain on each tom track, where they're actually hitting, so you can get that transient up, so that when you go to trigger, it's triggering the right note. Because I've had instances where if you're not careful, it'll trigger the snare hits on the tom track, because the snare transients are actually louder, because when they go to the toms, they're just playing really weak on them. So yeah, you have to go in and figure out, okay, what are they actually playing, or what were they intending to play? Let me raise those transients with clip gain so that it triggers correctly in trigger, and then you print that, and then you make sure after it's printed that the phase is okay. So yeah, it's a long, terrible process.
I know, it's to me, sometimes I get these tracks and I feel like, thank God these people aren't building houses, because it's like the whole like measure twice, cut once mentality and getting it right in the construction. it's just kind of ridiculous. And
Yeah.
and while I want things to sound their best, I find myself just shaking my head going, why couldn't they have just done this right the first time and just had either, hired a great drummer, doesn't matter if you can get a drummer all over this planet at this point to play in your thing. And yeah,
Yeah. I have,
soapbox.
yeah, quick story, like on touching on this exact frustration with this part of audio. I had this one band that came to me maybe like 3 years ago now. I won't say the band name, but they had like 7 or 8 song album, and they wanted me to mix and master it. And then I got all the files. They're like, they're just like an average metal band. They weren't too extreme, but they weren't like rock. So there was, I would just say, like, you know, American melodic metal. That female singer and a male singer. But anyway, they sent me all these files, and I'm going through them, and I'm like, okay, this might be a problem. So what I did was, like, the drums were not recorded that well at all. The guitars, basically it was like they were super green, and they recorded it all themselves at some local studio, and the engineer didn't really understand like how to approach this type of music. So it was that same thing, like all the tom tracks, the transients of the snare there was way more velocity on the snare in the tom tracks than the actual toms. So I'm like, shoot, I'm gonna have to, like, before I can even start mixing this, I have to go through every song, every track of the drums, and make sure, especially for the toms, because there's a lot of tom fills, like a shitload of fills. But the velocity of the actual hits of the toms were super low, and like the recording was really bad. And I told them, look, before I start this, do you want this to be natural, or do you want this to be super hard hitting, and do you want me to sound replace everything? And like, no, we want it to be natural. I'm like, okay. So I did the best I could getting those tom fills up in the mix. Unfortunately, like, they weren't as impactful as I would have liked personally, because there was so much noise floor. And once I like was able to bring up, how it's like when you EQ toms and you add a lot of high end, and you add some low end to like get them to really punch through in the mix. But the problem is, if there's a lot of noise floor and they're not hitting the toms loud enough, then you get all that cymbal high end that comes up every time there's a tom roll, right? Because you're boosting high end. I did all the mixes for them. I sent it to them, and they're like, yeah, we don't like how the toms sound. Can you bring them up? And I'm like, the more I would bring them up, there was more and more noise, because it was just recorded so terribly. I had to go through every song and replace every single kick, snare, and tom hit for the whole album. And like, I was so pissed off, like, for like a month after that project, because it took so much time, and they expected it to sound so phenomenal when the performance was not phenomenal, like the recording was not phenomenal. But I went above and beyond for them, and I basically just had to go in and manually, I triggered everything, printed it, and then make sure all the phasing was right. But I had to go in and redo every single note for kick, snares, and toms for like 7 or 8 songs, and took forever. And I was just like, and at that point I was just like, I was not vibing on the project. Yeah, I just had a bad taste in my mouth about it. But fortunately, that was the only time something like that has happened. But yeah, it can be pretty brutal when you get into situations like that.
I think I've arrived at a point where if things are that bad, I just have to get on a call with the band and just say, look, here's exactly what I'm encountering, and just be as truthful with them as possible.
Yeah.
And say, we can work with what we have, and I'll do the best I can, but to get this to the level based on your expectations that you're explaining to me, that's going to cost a heck of a lot more. And it might be better if you just go back into a studio and retrack this stuff. Otherwise, this is going to get prohibitively expensive.
Right. Yeah.
And I don't know, if you run into that, or, I mean, sometimes you get into these situations where you're like, well, do I just do it? And depending on the level of work you have at the time, it could be like, well, this is the only gig this month right now, so I might as well take this and just suck it up.
Yeah, that was kind of the situation for me. Like I had a couple other things going on, but I really needed that gig, so I had to like power through it. It was a decent sized amount because it was, you know, they pay me to mix and master like it was like 8 songs. I just powered through it, and I did the absolute best I could. But yeah, it was brutal because yeah, the performances were not good. The recording quality was not good, and yeah, that's the thing. You know, like they expected it to sound like, you know, to compete with their favorite records, favorite modern metal records, and you know, it's just like, you know, and it doesn't. I've found like with certain musicians, especially when they're starting out or they're super green, like no matter how much you explain to them like that reality, like for some of them they just don't understand. Like, no, it needs to be, you know, I'm hiring you, so you need to do your job as a whatever, and provide. You know, they still think that if they're hiring a professional to do their record, it that it's their job to make it sound like a top tier record. And it's like, well, that's a whole nother can of worms we could get into. But I've run into that many times where it's like, that's just not how it works. Like you can hire, you know, you can hire the guy that did your favorite record, but if you're not ready, if you don't know what you're doing, if you're super green, that absolutely doesn't mean that it's going to come anywhere near close to that, you know?
Yeah, well, there's also the approach of, and this is kind of transitioning into what I wanted to ask you about anyway, talking about just, you know, new ideas since we talked last about how to deal with finances, with projects and budgets. You know, if they think that they're hiring a top tier professional, then they should pay handsomely for it. And in my opinion,
Mm,
and if they're paying lowball money, then they shouldn't expect top tier results. If they're willing to pay a good amount of money to have you do it, then that leaves a little money in the budget for you to actually farm out to someone else who needs a gig. Hey, can you go through and set triggers up for all this so that I don't have to struggle with this as much and I can allocate this much money to each song for it or whatever. It's great that we all have our home studios, and it's great that we've had the democratization of all of this technology. However, what has been lost, I think, greatly, and in this case, I'm sure you would agree with me, is that the understanding from the inexperienced bands is that, oh, we can just do a shitty job and send it to you to clean up our mess, and we expect the best results for the lowest amount of money. And that's just, I refuse to play that game with those bands, and I expect them to level up. Look, you have all this ability to record yourself, learn how this works, and try to do a better job to send, you know, people to mix. In fact, I would encourage bands that, hey, mix it yourself and see how hard this is.
absolutely. Yeah. And I've encountered really young musicians that they're just they're just much more mature in that regard. Like they just get it. And I've encountered young musicians that they know what's up, you know, like, and they deliver great tracks. They don't they're not punishers like with notes. Like that's another term I like to use. Like there's a lot of people that especially the artists that come to you that they lowball you, and they have a problem with everything. The mix notes take forever, and they're like revision after revision after revision. Like those are the I call them the punishers. Like everything is a big deal. Everything has to be a nightmare, basically. But there are young musicians I've worked with that they're extremely professional and they deliver great tracks. They pay you a rate, and maybe there's 1 or 2 revisions, and then it's done, and everyone's happy. Like that has happened to me many times. And then same thing with more experienced musicians. But yeah, I think the longer we, you know, push through this career, I think most engineers go through that phase in the beginning where you're just taking what you can get. Maybe you really need the gigs, or you're putting up with the you know, kind of the not so great experience. But then, you know, as I've gotten older and gotten farther into the career, like I say no to a lot. I say no a lot more to stuff because I know you can smell from a mile away like this is gonna be bad. So I just reject a lot of projects.
One thing that I've always had, and I've tried to fine tune it over the years, is my gut, my ability to sense red flag moments, problem clients, clients that, as you say, they lowball you, and then their mix notes are the worst. It's like, at bar 32, there is a quarter note that needs to be just a little bit louder. It's like, oh, give me a break. Like, really? Do you really think that's going to make this song better with that quarter note higher?
Yeah, I could write a short little audiobook, or I could write like a book about all the crazy, ridiculous like studio experiences with like nightmare situations, mixed notes. And that's why I love that guy Glenn Fricker, when he had those like nightmare mixed note videos. Did you ever see those?
No, I didn't.
Remember him?
No.
Oh, you know who he is?
Oh, I know. Yeah, I know who Glenn is.
Okay. But yeah, when he first started, he did a lot of those videos where he would blur out their names, but he would just like show all of his crazy mixed notes from people, and I'm like, oh, this is great because it's so relatable. But yeah, I think it's just a matter of being more selective, and it's so much better for your soul and for your peace of mind to, instead of taking that gig that you have a bad feeling about, just keep going and don't take the gig, because you get to a certain point and you can just tell like something's going to be a problem. So yeah, I'm much more selective.
Have you, since we spoke in 2021, have you had any kind of revelations or changes of heart about how you do your audio business? Are there any things that you've done and made changes to that you think are a positive for you now?
Yeah. So for the longest time, I really struggled with just accepting the path that I'm on. So let me explain. Like, there's so many guys that they these entrepreneurs and these business guys, and especially in audio, they're saying like, you need to market yourself constantly. You need to be in everyone's face constantly. You need to make content constantly. You need to go after gigs. You need to like constantly be pushing yourself. And I agree with that to a certain extent, but I also think it can actually work against you if you do too much, and there have been situations where I've kind of put myself out there hesitantly, and I think when we're artists, we get into this because we love music, but we're not necessarily by default salesmen or businessmen. So I've had to learn that slowly over the years, because unfortunately that's what we have to do. We have to sell ourselves, our studio. We're a brand, right? And people come to us because they like our brand, our sound, our studio. So I've kind of just come to the realization that once you get to a certain point, you kind of just have to let go. I tried for a long time to, I need to be more aggressive. I need to reach out to more people so I can bring in more work. But I found that it kind of just started working against me. And now I'm just a lot more open to what the universe will provide, because there's been some great moments where I've learned to just let go, because we as engineers and producers, like we're control freaks. We want to control as much as we can and control our lives and shape our lives the best we can, the way we want it to be. But I found like the more I let go, the more better things come into my life. And it was really hard for me to do that. But now I'm just kind of like, well, I can only control so much. So I'm just going to do the best work I possibly can with people that respect me and value what I do. And that has been a major revelation, because now like things just come to me that I could never anticipate, and like I said, for a long time, I was just like constantly reaching out to people I wanted to work with, but I don't know how to, does that make sense? Like basically just letting the universe do its thing. And I know it's kind of a spiritual way of thinking, but I really believe that, if you're meant to be a musician, if you're meant to be a producer, if you're meant to do this, you have to work extremely hard, and yeah, you have to have grit and you have to have persistence, but at the same time, you kind of have to just go with the flow. You can't control everything. So
Yeah, and I'll add to that to say that one of the things that's really got me a fair amount of gigs is there's been a few projects that I purposely got involved in where the money was not the focus. There was an old high school friend who had this band that was just fantastic. And I kind of got in and I said, I can mix this stuff and I'll do it for this rate, because it was a project that I wanted to be involved in because I thought it would be a fun, cool project to mix. And that turned out really great. And that in conjunction with another gig that I did where I was part of this, there was I'll name it. There was a project that I got involved with called Domes of Energy. And Cliff Truesdell, who composed the theme song to Working Class Audio, Cliff and I stay in touch here and there. We haven't talked in a couple months, but he's super prolific. And I reached out to him and I said, I've been listening to a lot of Devo lately. Be interesting to do a Devo tribute project together. And I just, flippantly said that. Out of nowhere, all these tracks show up and he's like, okay, ball's in your court. My buddy Clint and I have done, Clint did the bass. I did all the guitars and vocals, put drums on this, mix it and get it mastered and let's put it out. I was like, okay. And, wasn't planning on that. I just kind of said that as an offhanded comment. And then he sent me these tracks and I did it. I went and recorded, had a buddy of mine record the drums and got out of the control room for that. And then I mixed it. And that old high school friends project, this band Cordova and this Domes of Energy project, like I put those out there for people to hear and they're like, I want my shit to sound like that. That sounds good. That sounds punchy and heavy. And it's a, whatever. It's got all the qualities that I want. And those are two projects that just kind of, I got involved with, and yet they've produced a lot of work as a result. People hear that and go, okay, cool. I like that. Let's hire this guy. So that's the other side of it. You can let the universe do what it does, but sometimes, if you have a personal project of your own, like it sounds like, you're doing a fair amount of stuff of your own, but also get involved in projects that don't necessarily equate to like big money, but you think this is a quality project. I should do this.
yeah, I love that. I love that story. 'Cause yeah, like you never know, like if you just, we think like when we're talking with our colleagues, our artists, and it's like when we're throwing ideas out there, and most of the time we don't think people are really gonna take us up on it. It's just like we're throwing out ideas, spitballing, whatever. But like what happened with you, like every once in a while, like someone will actually latch onto that, and then it leads to something amazing, and you're like, wow, I know you could never predict that in your life. So those are great moments. Those are the moments I really love about what we do is, it's really hard most of the time, but every once in a while, something absolutely phenomenal pops up and just completely changes the course of your life. And yeah, I've had quite a few of those. Like something happened recently. I had a newer client that I started working with this year. He's actually a phenomenal composer. Like he composes for film and TV. And his name's Travis Bacon. Great guy. He has a band called Contra Cult, which is like extreme industrial metal. But I mastered a single for him, and then a couple months went by, and I think I can't remember what we were talking about when I was like, yeah, man, if you ever need any more mastering, just let me know. Just, how we talk to people, like not really thinking anything will come of it like soon,
Mm-hmm.
and then, like a few weeks later, and this is when I was going through kind of a weird time. Like I had moved out of my place earlier this year, and then I was crashing back at my studio again because I was like in this transition phase. I went on this tour with one of my friend's bands. So I was like, okay, well, I'm moving out of this place. I'm going to be gone on tour. So I don't have time to like find a new place yet. So I crashed at my studio for a couple months. So I was like going through this transition phase and I'm like, crap, I need to I need to get a new place like soon. And the prices in LA, just like the rent prices in LA have just gotten crazy this year. So I was like, man, I need like a decent chunk of money up front to like get a new place right now. And I was like, shoot, I need something to come through, you know, not really just kind of thinking that in my head, you know? And then out of the blue, Travis was like, hey, you know what you said about if I ever need any more mastering? He sent me like 30 songs. And I'm like, what the? Like, I would have never ever thought like that would be a thing. But maybe, you know, send me a couple singles or an album. But he had two soundtracks and one of his solo EPs for his own music. And he's like, yeah, if you have time, here's a bunch of stuff I just finished. He's like, can you master it? I'm like, of course. So, and that helped me like that helped me get into a new place. It was like you know, a decent amount. Like I said before, like sometimes you just kind of have to, even as scary as things can get, you have to just kind of surrender and let go and not be so scared and not try and control it as much, even if you're in like a tight situation or even if you're like really scared. Because there's been times in my career I've been like freaking scared, like financially, you know what I mean? And like gigs aren't coming in, you know, bills and rent never stops. And you're like, shoot, there's not like, how much more can I do to like bring in gigs right now? Cause it's like, there's only so much you can do. Like you can advertise, you can reach out, but ultimately you have no control over what really comes in when, unless you're working for a label or if you have some situation where you're getting a consistent amount of gigs. I don't know that many people in audio that have something like that. Most of the time it's like a gig based thing and it's not stable. So I'm just letting the universe do its thing. And, you know, I show up every day. I put in 110%. I give my all to the clients that have shown that the mutual respect. So I'm just kind of going with the flow right now, man. And it's really, it's been really helpful, you know, so just letting go and not stressing as much. So that's kind of where I'm at, you know.
I've found that what works for me, because I've been in those situations a lot over the years where it's like, oh shit, you know, we need those big infusions of cash, or we need those, the constant gig, and the needs are starting to get ahead of us, and the gigs aren't staying, aren't keeping pace. What I've found is, if I treat it sometimes like a farmer would treat crops. It's like, well, okay, we know next season we're going to need this. Therefore, now we need to be planting seeds immediately and nourishing those seeds. So I do a fair amount of outreach and communication with people. And, I run into people. That's why I go to trade shows so much, because you never know. Planting seeds with artists and going to shows and saying, hey, yeah, I really like this song. It'd be cool if we could, I'd love to get in the studio with you and do this. Maybe we could work out a budget that, satisfies all, so that, I feel compensated and you feel like you're not overspending. And I try to have those like honest financial discussions too up front, just to say, you know, they'll say something like, oh man, I don't know. I don't know if we can afford it. What do you think that would cost? And then I just try to like talk it through and go, well, let's see, we need to do this and we could probably economize here. What if we did it like this, and just work it out with them? Because sometimes that straight up marketplace of this is what it costs, if you want to ride the ride, and that scares some people sometimes. But if you can have an honest dialogue and just say, well, what if we did that this month, and that, you could afford that, and then we could move on to this stage. And I find that a series of those conversations start to pile up, and then the work just starts to materialize over the course of the next several months. And you're like, oh shit, I got to make sure I don't double book myself. And that's
Yeah.
all, that becomes a whole new great problem to have. I've done that to a point where, like, in fact, it happened right before we got on the call. I got a text from a client, hey, let's talk about Sunday. And I'm like, Sunday? Oh shit, that's right. We're in the studio Sunday. I need to get my act together and get our hit list together of what we're trying to accomplish. Cause I'm kind of like, not really producing, but kind of co-producing. So yeah, that's my thought on that is just that planting seeds and planning for the next season kind of mentality. using those analogies of farmers and to really plot forward what it is you need to get done.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I found that I think there's a lot of value in networking with other engineers, other producers, other audio professionals, absolutely. But from my experience, I mean, it's great to learn from other people and to make connections that way, absolutely. But from my experience, the most valuable relationships I've developed in my life that have led to projects, to great friendships, great projects, great collaborations, artists with artists, because ultimately they're the ones that, you know, if they want to work with you, they'll hit you up and they'll hire you. Like I very rarely ever get any referrals from other engineers because everyone's scrambling for their own work most of the time. You know what I mean? So I do think it's great to have a nice network of people, the professionals that are doing similar things as you, of course. And I mean, I think I've sent out more work to other people than has come in, which I'm completely fine with, because I really like to, when I have a project where, okay, I'm gonna send this to be edited, or I'm gonna hit up so and so to do this because I don't have time, or I don't want to, not interested in this. So I try to send as many gigs out as possible. But personally, like I haven't really had much luck getting gigs from other engineers or producers, like, because everyone is just like trying to grab their own stuff, which is, it's like survival mode. So I totally get it. So yeah, I find the most value in just talking with artists and bands, and like, you know, reaching out to people. Like I do this a lot, you know, I will search for new bands I haven't heard of, and I'll go check out their Instagram, and I'll just message them, be like, hey, like your new album, like this song is great. And then if a conversation starts, then I keep flowing it. I let it flow. But you know, like 90% of the time, like you don't get a response, and that's totally fine. But I do a lot of that. And sometimes it does lead to things. So it's like this balance of kind of letting go and see what comes your way. And also, you know, going out and pursuing artists that you want to work with, because it does work. You just have to do a lot of it.
You know, another approach too, which you seem to be in a position of doing more than I am, and that is that as players who are engineers, producers, you are in a unique position where you can create great stuff of your own, put that out there, and that becomes a calling card. And I'll cite Scott Evans of Kowloon Walled City as an example. Scott's abilities as a producer, as an engineer, to me, I've seen the growth in his band's records over time. I'm spacing on the name of the record, and I'll put a link in the show notes when I figure it out. But there's a record that he did for his band that when I hear it, I'm like, oh my God, that has everything that I love about record making in it. And, you know, musically, it's not something I listen to every day, but it's definitely something I can listen to and enjoy quite a bit. And I think that as a result of Scott's efforts with his own band, I see the bands that he does mix work for, and those records sound incredible too. And I think that when you're a player, you have this advantage where you can do your own best work on your own thing, and that calling card just shines like a bright neon sign to everybody else, especially if you're an active band like Scott's band is. And then the work, you know, can speak for itself. People trust you because you're a player and they know that you know what they're dealing with. I think bands that deal with engineers, producers that don't really play all that often, sometimes that takes a little more trust building. But when you see a fellow musician who you're like, oh, I love so and so's band. Oh, they produce and they engineer. Oh my gosh, let's have them do our record.
Yeah, I totally agree with that, because it's you know, it's easier to relate in the studio. Like I'm a guitarist, I play guitar and bass, so then you can really get into the nitty gritty with other guitarists and, you know, players in the studio, because it's like you can really bounce ideas off each other, and then it's easier to communicate. Like, you know, I've been like, you know, you grab the guitar, hey, try it like this, or grab the bass, hey, try this, you know, and then it's it's just a deeper way to connect on the record. So yeah, I love that. And I do think, yeah, you do have an advantage if you're also a player as a producer engineer. And it's, yeah, it does. And when I've worked with other engineers, like it does open up another layer of comfort in the studio. That's for sure.
Most definitely. Well, so are you still in the same place?
Yeah, I'm still at Sound City.
Okay. Yeah, I was talking to Gina Johnson. She's a producer engineer in Nashville, and she was talking about, I don't know if you heard this episode. I mentioned you because she made a home studio and she put glitter in the paint for the walls.
Mm-hmm.
And I talked about the last time that I came over to your place. I was in the sun when I came in, and my glasses had transitioned to being dark. And I walked into your place, which was painted black, and you shut the door, and I was like, "Hang on, Alex, I got to acclimate to the environment here." Like it was just like the exact opposite aesthetic of her glitter in the walls thing.
Yeah.
But I love your place. I love the vibe of it. It's so uniquely you too, which I really have a deep appreciation for. In that it's like, that wouldn't work for me, but I love that it represents you in every single way possible.
Yeah, that's another lovely thing about, having your own space, even if, if you have a home studio, and just being able to, because, we spend so much time in these spaces. So it's like you can customize it, make it your own, make it somewhere that you just can't wait to start working, and I think we've all been in those kind of studios where it's very clinical and like feels like a dentist's office, and it's like really uninspiring. So I think I'd rather be in a studio that has a great decor, great aesthetic with maybe less gear, but it feels great. Yeah, gear it's another thing I've really, really learned deeply is like gear is just an extra bonus, man. Like if even going into Sunset Sound or a big studio, the gear is great, but like you said before, it's all about the musician. It's all about the song. Like the gear has gotten so good, like the entry level gear these days. Like you don't need a lot of gear. You don't need to spend a lot of money on the gear, but if you have a great player and a great song, like you can make a record anywhere on like super low budget. It just has to be the right players, and that's the most important thing.
Everything on the front end, at the musician's side, if that's in place, the gear almost is like, it's an afterthought. Like as long as you have the basics and you're not like overdoing any particular part of the process, over compressing, over distorting, et cetera, you're going to be okay.
Absolutely.
Well, on that note, I'm going to let you go. I'm going to go do some work today, actually. It was great to talk to you, great to catch up, and great to see you. Once again, audience, I will put a link to the previous episode in the show notes. You can check that out because I really encourage you to do so. Always great to see you, Alex.
Great to talk to you, Matt. Thanks for having me again. And I just wanted to say before we get off, man, thank you so much for doing what you do with this podcast. Like I've been listening to it for many years, and I know it's helped so many other people. And it's mainly just to feel like, okay, I'm not alone in this experience. Like, everyone is going through similar types of struggles and successes. So yeah, thank you so much for continuing with Working Class Audio.
Oh, thank you. Well, I appreciate everybody's listening, and I appreciate your support as usual, of course. And yeah, I'll keep doing it.
Awesome.
All right, man. Take care, and we'll see you when I see you.
All right. Thanks, Matt.